Hello, and thank you for asking me to give a presentation to your orchid conference there in Taiwan. I'm Don Dennis. I live in Scotland, and I've been growing orchids for about 25 years now.
For over 40 years, I had been interested in the batch flower remedies. I'd never had any particular interest in orchids or flowers for that matter. And then in the early 1990s, I was introduced to orchids by two orchid essence makers, one in Germany, one from California. And the lady in California in particular had such a passion for the blooms and the plants, and she communicated that in her seminar. And it got me interested, and I ended up buying a Phragmipedium hanapapo, one of the early Besseyi hybrids. And that one orchid bred for me led me to purchase over the last 25 years several thousand orchids. This most recent purchase is Oncidopsis Living Fire Redmond. And just behind it you have one of a few of Pleurothallis restrepoides. And next to it, its cousin Pleurothallis phalangifera. I'm afraid it's just past its bloom. I can grow the Pleurothallises here. You probably can't do so in Taiwan. This is a wonderful specimen of Pleurothallis truncata. Grows at about 3,000 meters high in the Andes. But my first love has been the frags. This is a Frag Saint-Ouen, and I just love the frags.
When I try to explain flower essences to people that aren't familiar with them, I often use acupuncture as a means of explaining. Because just as we have qi that flows along our meridians and through the body, plants too have the same qi coursing through their whole leaf structure and root structure and stems, and it kind of gets concentrated in the bloom, in blooming time. And so when we make a flower essence, what we're trying to do is to convey some of that bioelectric energy, some of that qi, into water, and then we hold it there. It gives it shelf life by adding a bit of alcohol. The alcohol anchors the qi, holds the qi in the bottle.
And each different type of orchid has its own quality of qi. So you would expect that the Phragmipedium, these pink ones, are going to have an impact on the heart chakra. So the qi from the drops enters the mouth and then travels along the meridians and arrives at the heart chakra and helps to calm the heart. It's harder to explain some of the more tricky species. But here's a fascinating example. With Pleurothallis restrepoides, we found early on that this particular species, the Pleurothallis restrepoides, helps children with verbal development. Now that's just the quality of the qi, seems to help verbal development. So I was fascinated years ago to read in a separate book about orchids that a local tribe in South America had traditionally given powdered root of this orchid to children to help with verbal development. And this orchid, the Oncidopsis Living Fire, has the colors of red and gold to it. So it's made a very new essence for us, but we believe that it is one that will help with prosperity and good luck. The greenhouse has a warm section. It's smaller than the cool section, but here's a Psychopsis kalihi, which I'm sure that you must have seen in Taiwan. because it likes the warm temperatures there, being the genus being from the lowland forests of Colombia. This produced an essence that we call dragon mask. So part of what I want to mention here is that my interest came from learning about orchids from a flower essence standpoint, and it led me to buy a few thousand orchids over the last 25 years. Well, there are hundreds of thousands of people in the world that are interested in flower essences. So showing them the merits of orchids can broaden the market for orchids. I know that my work was inspired a woman in Austria to build a whole greenhouse just so that she could start growing orchids. And this is an interesting point because in the UK over the last 20 years, the market for orchids has diminished somewhat. There are few young people showing interest in orchids. So we need to encourage interest. And there's a diverse number of avenues for people to become interested in orchids. And I, for one, just wouldn't have become interested in orchids if it weren't for learning about them as flower essence related plants. I thought I should just mention briefly that my greenhouse, this is my third greenhouse because we recently moved, and I'm quite certain it's the best one that I've had. It's called a polycrub and is a design that was originated in Shetland and has been storm tested to withstand 120-mile-an-hour storm winds. It's a twin-walled 10 mil polycarbonate stretched over leftover feed pipes from fish farms. So the orchids seem very comfortable in here. It does build up heat quickly in direct sunshine, so you'd need a half-silvered material over the top of it, and you also need a good extraction system. But it's a very strong structure. So I'm quite pleased with it because up here we need that. We get 100-mile-an-hour winds quite regularly on our island in Scotland. In effect, we could say that the fundamental purpose of the orchid essences is to help to create optimum psychological health. If somebody is holding on to trauma from childhood or even from past lives, then this will be a problem. It leads to various issues and difficulties in the rest of their lives. So the orchid essences are very good at helping with this. So, for example, with this Phragmipidium santuon, it just basically goes into the heart chakra and helps to bring a kind of quiet joy and to heal sadness that's within the heart. So if you look at that from how many different ways we can be hurt in life, on different levels and different aspects of being hurt, that it would explain why we have created just over 100 different orchid essences over the 23 years that I've been making orchid essences. And we've also created about 80 combination essences, combining the different single orchid essences for specific blockages and traumas, etc. So there's an enormous richness. If you consider we've made 100, well, to us that seems like an awful lot. But when I stop and think about the Orchidaceae, 25 to 30,000 species out there, how many hybrids have we created? Maybe 500,000. The possibilities for research in the decades ahead
is simply staggering. I can't see any end to the possibilities of creating new essences in the fullness of time. It's almost like pop music. There will always be new songs. Who would have thought that Ed Sheeran would be important? Surely the Beatles would have been enough.
I'll take you down now to the office so you can see the range of what we do. Our making of orchid essences with the orchids that I grow is actually one of the very few commercial uses of orchids that is out there. And unlike the Chinese medicine tradition that would involve chopping up and macerating hundreds or thousands of dendrobium canes for use in Chinese medicine, our process of making these orchid essences actually doesn't involve damaging or killing any of the orchids, because we simply immerse the bloom, either partly or fully, in a bowl of water for 5 or 6 hours, occasionally 24 hours, and then we remove the bloom still attached to the plant, and at that point we add the alcohol, and that gives it shelf life. And some drops of that original mother tincture, as it's called, goes into these small bottles that we then ship out around the world to our various distributors, including to Chipang Chang there in Taiwan. So it's a non-destructive method. That's why I only need one specimen of a given orchid in order to make the essence with it. And as I say, it's one of the very few commercial uses of orchids that we know of. Over the years, I've, of course, taken thousands of photos of the orchids that I've been growing, and we used some of these photos to make cards that we send out to our customers. And so this shows you Dendrobium spectabile, which is an essence that helps with psychic protection. This Vanda hybrid helps with healing emotional aspects of the heart, particularly helpful for somebody who's lost a loved one just recently. Whereas this combination that we call soul's balm helps to ease the pain of sorrow and sadness in the soul at a different level from the previous one there. The qualities of Paphiopedilum spicerianum are very interesting because it helps to resolve subconscious issues that our mind is struggling with. But it does this primarily in our sleep state, through our dreams. After the frags, the genus Bulbophyllum is my favorite. I just love the amazing variety that you find within this genus. So with Bulbophyllum longiflorum, this one helps people to connect with their inner beauty. Whereas Bulbophyllum echinolabium, very different. And as you might guess from the smell of this species, this one actually helps the gastrointestinal tract, particularly the large intestine. It also helps the liver. A very interesting point is that from an orchid essence standpoint, we're not just interested in pretty orchids. We're interested in the variety that the natural world produces, because Bulbophyllum phalaenopsis has an amazing energetic quality, but it would be difficult to explain that in the few minutes that I've got here. But just to say, the market, as it were, for orchids in relation to orchid essences is a bit different from the market for pretty things that people want to look at on their windowsill. And I am so pleased that many years ago I came upon a very nice specimen of Bulbo Elizabeth Ann Buckleberry, major essence for us. And it introduces topics that are well worth going into. We could spend hours talking about the higher chakras, the ones that are above the body. With Bulbophyllum lobii, there really isn't any element that we see in connection with its wonderful fragrance. I mean, if you could make a perfume that smelled like lobii, that would sell very well. But Bulbophyllum lobii is an important essence in relation to the harmony of the energy flow between our chakras in the body and moving up through the psyche. I'm far better at growing the frags than I am at growing the paphs. Probably because the frags were the first genus that I came upon. I have a tendency to overwater. But Paph gratixianum from Vietnam, very important, very, very interesting. If you've ever known somebody who is consciously on a spiritual path but is a pain in the neck because they make odd demands on people around them, this orchid has a great quality of helping us with our self-reflective thought process. This is Neomoria irorata, a species from the Central America that you don't see very often. It's not an easy one to grow, and it's the only species in its genus. Has a very interesting fragrance, and it's a very good one for people who are blocked in relation to having intimate relationships, including the Lalo-Cattleya angel love, obviously an intergeneric hybrid. And yet, if you needed to have one essence to help calm people down and make them feel better in this troubled time of the pandemic, it would be this essence, which we call angel love. A beautiful orchid, lovely fragrance, and really just outstanding in its ability to help people in troubled times. I'd like to say that just as it requires a great deal of experience, training, and skill to grow orchids properly, and who of us is not still learning? There's always more to learn. Working with the orchid essences also requires skill and experience and training. We have this body map showing receptor points on the body that can be determined with kinesiology, muscle testing, so that if somebody has a pain in a part of the body or a blockage in a part of the body, we know that it can be addressed through a specific orchid essence. This body map represents years of research by our colleague, Dr. Brita Babapule, and also by other students of his. So it isn't just a case of, oh, here's a bottle, let me take a few drops. No, there's work that is done best through deeper understanding of the nature of what one is endeavoring to do.
So once again, thank you very much for the kind invitation to give this presentation at your conference. I hope the conference goes very well. I imagine that some of you may be perplexed by some of the information I've shared here, but if you have any questions, then I'm sure that Chi Pang will be able to answer them and follow up with discussion with you in the weeks and months ahead. So once again, thank you, and all the best.